In the late 1980s and all of the 1990s, it was impossible to go anywhere and not hear the music of our subject today. Aptly referred to as both the Mexican Madonna and the Queen of Tejano music, the life of the singer was cut tragically short by her friend and president of her fan club, Yolanda Saldivar, in a shooting at a Days Inn in Corpus Christi, Texas. Her legacy in music has continued to persevere, and to this day is one of the most beloved musical acts of all time. This is a brief history of Selena Quintanilla. As always, this episode of A Brief History contains graphic content and may not be suitable for all audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. In this episode, we will be building the Corpus Christi home of Selena's parents. Selena Quintanilla was born on April 16, 1971, to Marcela and Abraham Quintanilla in Lake Jackson, Texas. Selena, as well as her siblings Suzette and Abraham, also known as AB, grew up in Lake Jackson together and had happy and loving childhoods. As a former musician, Abraham was quick to notice the musical talent of his youngest daughter, and wanting to find a way back into the music industry he had been so involved in during his younger years, he formed the band Selena y los Dinos, an homage or possibly continuation of the band he had been involved with from the late 50s to the early 70s, called Los Dinos. Selena y los Dinos consisted of Selena on vocals, her sister Suzette on drums, and her brother AB on bass guitar. The family band played at local events and gatherings like quinceañeras and even on street corners. Really anywhere they could find to showcase their talents. Until 1981, when Abraham opened up a Mexican restaurant called Papagayos in their hometown of Lake Jackson, Texas. After the opening of the restaurant, the family band played for diners while Abraham and Marcela worked the restaurant. Selena was only 9 years old when she began performing publicly. The restaurant was unfortunately short-lived due to the 1981 Texas recession and eventually went bankrupt. After the closure of Papagayos, the family moved to Corpus Christi, Texas to further their musical career. The family band had become their only source of income, and thankfully they grew quickly in popularity. So much so that Selena was removed from school by her father in just the 8th grade, against the suggestions of teachers at school. Abraham told one of the teachers in question to mind her own business. He refurbished an old bus and began taking the family out on tour. In 1984, Selena y los Dinos recorded their first LP album using Tejano music compositions. Tejano being a musical genre fusing Mexican, European, and American influences, a male-dominated Spanish-language genre. Selena, who had only grown up speaking English, was able to learn Spanish phonetically to sing in the language with help from her father. Despite never having spoken Spanish before her first album, she did eventually become fluent in the language. Selena and her family did various appearances on Spanish-language radio shows and continued to perform around the Texas area until 1987, when Selena was discovered by Rudy Trevino, founder of the Tejano Music Awards. Selena's popularity grew with record label executives referring to her as the next Gloria Estefan. Given the chance to choose to sign with either EMI Latin's Capitol Records or Sony Music Latin, Abraham chose Capitol Records due to potential for a crossover album, and also due to the fact that the children would be the first musicians to be signed to the label. In 1989, Selena released her self-titled debut album, and peaked at 7 on the US Billboard Regional Mexican Album charts. As she became more well-known, she eventually became a spokesperson for Coca-Cola and continued to see success. Eventually, a man named Chris Perez joined Selena's band as a guitarist, and the pair hit it off instantly. Perez had a girlfriend but pushed her aside to pursue Selena romantically, though the pair did hide their relationship from those around them, fearing that Selena's father, Abraham, would attempt to break them up. They managed to keep their relationship quiet and unnoticed for nearly 2 years. By 1991, Selena's success was unquestionable. Her second album, Ven Conmigo, had been certified platinum, having shown sales of at least 150,000 units. A fan of Selena approached the singer to ask permission to start a fan club. Yolanda Saldivar's request was approved, with Abraham hoping that a fan club would bring even further recognition to the band and Selena herself. Yolanda ended up becoming a close and trusted friend of the Quintanillas and also president of the fan club. In 1992, Suzette found out about the relationship between Selena and Chris Perez, and immediately told her father, who disapproved and eventually told Selena he would disband the group if she continued to see him. Selena and Chris agreed to save face but continued to see each other in secret, and finally decided to elope on April 2, 1992, believing that if they were married, Abraham would eventually be forced to accept their relationship. It caused serious contention with the family and caused Abraham to alienate himself from his family for a time, until he eventually approached and apologized to Chris, as well as offering him his position back in the band. Just a month after her marriage, her third studio album released and is known today as her breakthrough album. Selena was hailed as an artist of the people, the Mexican Madonna, and the Queen of Tejano music. Selena continued to make music and in 1994 began branching out of the music scene to design and manufacture a line of clothing called Selena Etc. Friend of the family Yolanda Saldivar was given the management position for the boutiques, which reportedly earned Selena over $5 million. In December of 1994, though, the boutiques began to suffer financially after losing a significant amount of staff. In speaking with the members of staff, it became apparent that the issue was Yolanda, who was disliked and frequently dismissed staff that she disliked. Despite the complaints about Yolanda, Selena refused to believe that she would behave in such a way and continued her employment. Abraham, on the other side, leaned towards the employees and warned Selena to be careful of Yolanda. More and more people involved with the boutique stepped up to speak about Yolanda's increasingly erratic behavior and her seeming obsession with Selena herself. In 1995, Selena and her family began receiving phone calls from fans who claimed that they had joined the fan club but had gotten nothing in return. It was shown that Yolanda had embezzled at least $30,000 from the fan club as well as Selena's boutiques. Abraham and other members of the family said if Selena was not able to disprove the accusations, then they would take the evidence to police, and subsequently banned Selena from seeing Yolanda at all. Selena still was hesitant, wanting to believe the best of her friend. In March of 1995, Selena demanded the financial records from Yolanda, but Yolanda delayed handing them over, claiming she had recently been physically and sexually assaulted. Selena was concerned and went to a clinic with Yolanda, becoming angry with her after hearing Yolanda give doctors a seemingly different story than what she had been told earlier. After leaving the clinic, Selena said they would need to distance themselves in order to appease Abraham and dropped off Yolanda at a motel. The following day, Selena decided to go back to the motel and demand the financial papers she needed. Abraham had called Chris Perez, worried that Selena missed a recording session, and Chris spoke to his wife just before she arrived at the hotel. This would be the last time he would speak to Selena. After arriving at the motel, Selena and Yolanda began arguing, with guests complaining to the desk about the loud noises coming from the adjacent motel room. Selena yelled that Yolanda could no longer be trusted, demanded her financial papers, and dumped Yolanda's briefcase out onto the bed. Inside the briefcase were the bank statements Selena had been looking for, and a gun, which was grabbed by Yolanda. Selena attempted to run from Yolanda but was shot in the lower right shoulder, severing an artery and causing massive blood loss. Despite being severely injured, Selena ran towards the lobby for help, leaving a trail of blood coming from Yolanda's motel room. Selena was seen by others in the motel clutching her chest as she ran from Yolanda, who continued to follow while calling her a bitch. Selena collapsed in the lobby and spoke her last words, Yolanda 158, the name and room number of her attacker. Staff called 911 and tried to stop the bleeding, but Selena began to lose consciousness. She was rushed to the hospital by paramedics and was transferred to a trauma room after regaining a heartbeat after being declared clinically brain dead. Doctors did everything they could to save the 23-year-old singer, but were ultimately unsuccessful. While doctors were attempting to save Selena, Yolanda was attempting to flee the motel. Yolanda's truck had been blocked in by responding officers, and eventually a SWAT team and FBI crisis negotiation were called in to deal with Yolanda, who was now holding the pistol at her own head, threatening to commit suicide. After 9 hours of intense negotiation, Yolanda surrendered and was arrested. Yolanda Saldivar pled not guilty, stating that the shooting had been accidental. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours and found Yolanda Saldivar guilty of murder. She received a life sentence with no possibility of parole for 30 years. During her time in prison, Yolanda has been placed in isolation and spends 23 hours a day alone. This is due to the outcry of anger at Yolanda for killing Selena, especially by the incarcerated women she is in prison with. If let out into the general population of prison, there is no question that Yolanda would be killed by her fellow inmates. Yolanda Saldivar will be eligible for parole on March 30th, 2025. The response to Selena's death was massive, with vigils and memorials being held throughout Texas and California. Radios played her music nonstop. More than 78,000 fans signed a book of condolence at the wake for Selena, and 30,000 to 40,000 fans passed by her casket. It was in 1997 that I was first introduced to Selena's life, in the biopic aptly titled Selena, with Jennifer Lopez playing the Queen of Tejano music herself. Despite the initial criticism regarding Lopez's Puerto Rican ancestry rather than Mexican, she was eventually celebrated for the role and thrust into the spotlight. This was the movie that made Jennifer Lopez famous. The movie solidified Selena as an icon to those who may not have been introduced to her music beforehand. I vividly remember after the movie came out going to the roller skating rink and hearing Dreaming of You playing over the sound system at least 3 times a night. Selena had a cult-like following among Latinos before her death, but afterwards she became a household name and a cultural icon. Thank you for joining me for this episode of A Brief History. Thank you to my patrons who support this series. You are so appreciated. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime Sims content. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time.